You know, you really wouldn't judge a car's engine just by looking at the exterior paint job, right?
Right. Definitely not.
I mean, you could have this flawless cherry red chassis, but if the transmission is completely shot, that car isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, it's just a giant paperweight at that point.
Exactly. But for the longest time, that is exactly how the world looked at human language. You'd hear someone speak and you'd analyze their grammar, their vocabulary, the literal sounds coming out of their mouth.
Just categorizing the form of it.
Right, and you'd point and say, there it is, that's language, look at that beautiful paint job.
Which is, the entire field of linguistics. It was completely built on that structural approach, categorizing things by how they look and sound. Nouns, verbs, syntax. It was all about the shape of the words.
But then you step into the world of applied behavior analysis, and suddenly that exterior paint job doesn't matter at all. We're popping the hood. We're looking at an entirely different landscape that is completely functional.
Yeah, a total paradigm shift.
And if you're prepping for your BCBA exams right now, you already know we're talking about B.F. Skinner's radical shift in how we understand communication. So, welcome to a special deep dive for behavioral intelligence con Mara Sánchez.
We are so excited for this one.
We really are. Our mission today is to help you conquer domain B, specifically task list item B19, which is to identify and distinguish among verbal operands.
And we've got a really comprehensive stack of sources for this. We're pulling directly from foundational behavior analysis texts, including the classic Cooper, Heron, and Heward book, alongside several rigorous BCBA mock exams like the BAS mock.
The heavy hitters.
Exactly. We're going to look at the contingencies at play so that when you sit down for that exam, you aren't just, trying to remember a flashcard definition.
Which never works anyway.
No, it really doesn't. You need to understand the actual mechanics of what is happening under the hood.
Let's jump right into the deepest end of the pool here. In everyday life, the word verbal, it usually just means talking out loud, right?
Right, vocalizing.
Yeah, if someone is speaking, they're being verbal. If they're quiet, they're nonverbal. But back in, I think it was 1957, B.F. Skinner published his book, Verbal Behavior, and he completely threw that dictionary definition out the window.
He really did. He defined verbal behavior exclusively by its function, not its form.
Okay, so break that down for us. What does that actually mean?
Well, in behavior analysis, verbal behavior is any behavior where the reinforcement is mediated by another person.
Mediated by another person.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The listener is the critical component here. Without a listener to mediate the consequence, the behavior just isn't verbal.
So going back to my car engine analogy, we don't really care if the client is speaking vocally.
Oh, not at all.
We don't care if they're using, like, American Sign Language or pointing to a PEX board.
Your picture exchange communication system, yeah.
Right, or using a speech-generating device. We only care about what makes the car move. Does the behavior act upon another person to get a result?
Exactly. The Cooper text gives this brilliant clinical example of how broad this functional definition really is. Imagine a 2-month-old baby.
Okay, got it.
When that baby engages in differential crying because they're hungry, and that crying reliably results in a parent bringing a bottle of milk.
Wait, the crying is verbal behavior?
Technically, yes. That crying is verbal behavior.
Because the baby can't physically walk to the fridge and pour the milk themselves?
Right. They have to behave in a way that causes another person to get the milk for them. The parent is the conduit for the baby's reinforcement.
Wow, okay. The parent social mediation is the entire mechanism, yeah.
If the baby cries and some weird machine automatically dispenses milk without any human intervention, the crying wouldn't be verbal behavior. It's the social interaction acting upon the listener that defines it.
Okay, so if the physical form of the communication is largely irrelevant, how did Skinner actually categorize all this? I mean, if we aren't using nouns and verbs, we need a different way to map out the engine.
Right, we have to categorize these behaviors by their triggers and their payoffs.
The antecedents and consequences.
Exactly. Skinner broke them down into specific functional categories called operants. And the most fundamental one, usually the very first verbal operant that humans develop, is the mand.
The mand.
Yeah. A really good trick to remember it is to think of the words demand or command.
Ah, okay, the wants and needs.
Precisely.
Yeah.
By definition, a mand is evoked by a motivating operation or an MO, and is the only verbal operant that is maintained by specific reinforcement.
Let's translate those terms a bit for anyone listening who gets bogged down by the jargon. A motivating operation, an MO, it's really just a state of deprivation or aversiveness, right?
Yeah, it's a fundamental physical or psychological drive.
So say you haven't had water in 6 hours, so your body is in a state of water deprivation. That deprivation is the MO.
Right. It makes water highly valuable in that specific moment.
So you say water, and someone hands you a glass of water. Getting that exact thing you asked for, the water, is the specific reinforcement.
You nailed it. And on a mock exam, you might see a scenario structured exactly like that. Let's say Susan is running discrete trials with Tommy.
Oh, yeah.
She places a goldfish cracker on the table out of reach and asks, "What do you want?" Tommy says, "Goldfish," and Susan gives him the cracker to eat.
Because the payoff, eating the goldfish, was the specific item he named. Saying goldfish in this scenario functions purely as a mand.
Exactly. And this is where understanding the mechanism becomes incredibly powerful in clinical practice, specifically with functional communication training, or FCT.
Oh yeah, FCT is a massive part of a BCBA's toolkit.
It really is.
Let's say a client is engaging in severe target behaviors. Maybe they're, I don't know, dropping to the floor or swiping an entire desk.
Right. So the clinician doesn't just try to suppress the desk swiping. That doesn't solve the underlying need. They introduce FCT.
They teach a replacement.
Yeah, they teach the client to hand over a physical break card, or maybe sign the word break. They're teaching a socially appropriate man to replace the severe behavior.
And it works because it accesses the exact same specific reinforcement, getting away from the math task. But the new man requires less effort and, well, doesn't result in a messy room.
Exactly. You are literally rewiring how they interact with their environment.
That is the power of the man. But we don't just communicate to get things we want, we also communicate just to share our experience of the world.
Yeah, which brings us to the tact.
The what's of our environment. A tact is how we label things.
A great memory aid here is to think of making contact with the physical environment. A tact is evoked by a nonverbal discriminative stimulus, a nonverbal SD, and it's maintained by generalized conditioned reinforcement, or GCR.
Let's do another jargon translation here. A nonverbal SD is simply an environmental trigger that isn't language.
Right. It's something you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch.
So you look up and see a red sports car driving by. The sight of the car is the nonverbal SD.
Exactly. You point at it and say, "Car?" And your friend looks over and says, "Wow, yeah, that's a cool car."
So their attention, their agreement, their eye contact, that is the generalized conditioned reinforcement, the GCR.
You got it.
Yeah.
You didn't say car because you wanted to drive it. You weren't, deprived of a car.
Right.
You said purely to label your environment and get social validation. The sources have a perfect example for this, actually.
Oh, let's hear it.
A child is sitting in the backseat of a moving car. They see the giant golden M sign outside the window.
The nonverbal visual trigger.
Yes, and they shout the name of the fast food restaurant. The mother turns back and says, "Good job, you saw the sign." That is a tact.
Because it's entirely maintained by the mother's praise, not by, receiving a carton of French fries.
Exactly.
Okay, I have to push back on this, though, because life is never this clean.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Right. The textbook definitions make it sound like these operants live in isolated little silos. But what if a child is walking through the kitchen, they see a chocolate chip cookie sitting on the counter, and they happen to be starving because they skipped lunch?
Mm-hmm.
They point and say cookie, and the parent hands them the cookie. They labeled something they saw, but they also got the specific item. How on earth are you supposed to categorize that on a board exam?
That scenario is the exact reason why Skinner's functional approach is so nuanced. Behavior rarely occurs in a vacuum under a single controlling variable. What you just described is known as multiple control.
Multiple control.
Specifically, the board exams will refer to this as an impure tact.
Ah, so it's a blend of the two.
Exactly.
Okay.
The child's response saying cookie was controlled by a nonverbal SD, which was the visual sight of the cookie on the counter. But it was simultaneously controlled by a motivating operation, the child's hunger. Because the consequence was receiving the specific item, the behavior ultimately functions as a mand, but the sight of the item helped evoke it. Recognizing that a single utterance can be under the control of multiple variables is how you distinguish a novice from a board-certified behavior analyst.
It's all about looking at the entire context of the engine. The parts interact. So if we know how people ask for things and how they label things, how do we actually build those skills from scratch if a client doesn't have them yet?
That bridges us perfectly into the next pair of operants, the echoic and the intraverbal.
Okay, let's start with the echoic.
The echoic is the foundational building block for early intervention. It's evoked by a verbal SD. So instead of an environmental trigger like a car or a cookie, the trigger is someone else's language.
Someone speaks first.
Right. The defining feature of an echoic is that it has both point-to-point correspondence and formal similarity with that antecedent stimulus.
Okay, before we go any further, let's unpack those two terms. Point-to-point correspondence and formal similarity, because these are the two concepts that really seem to trip up students the most.
Oh, absolutely. They're stumbling blocks.
But if you understand them, the rest of the verbal operants just like click into place.
They really do. Let's break them down using the source material. Point-to-point correspondence simply means the beginning, middle, and end of the message match exactly.
The content is identical.
Exactly. If I say cat and you say cat, the data matches point for point.
Yeah.
If I write the word cat on a piece of paper and you write the word cat on a piece of paper, the content still matches point to point.
So it's basically a mirror image of the actual information.
Yes. Now, formal similarity means that the stimulus and the response are in the exact same sense mode.
Sense mode meaning auditory, visual, or tactile.
Right. If I speak a word out loud, which is an auditory stimulus, and you speak the word back out loud, an auditory response that is formal similarity. Auditory in, auditory out.
Makes sense.
If I write a word down a visual stimulus, and you write it down a visual response, that is also formal similarity. Visual in, visual out.
Okay, bringing it back to the echoic operant, it has both. I hear you say jump, that's auditory, and I say jump, also auditory. That's formal similarity.
Yep.
And the word is exactly the same, jump and jump. So that's point-to-point correspondence.
You've got it. And we use that constantly in clinical settings. The sources provide a classic echoic training example. Let's say a clinician notices a child is looking longingly at a trampoline.
That's the MO, they want to jump.
Exactly. The clinician gets on, jumps up and down to provide a nonverbal prompt, and then delivers the verbal SD, saying jump.
And then the child echoes, jump?
Yes. And the clinician immediately praises them and lets them on the trampoline.
So you pair the echoic prompt with the motivating operation to build the language pathway.
Exactly.
But simply repeating things isn't a conversation. I mean, if I say, how are you, and you say, how are you, mirror, we aren't having a dialogue.
No, you're just a parrot at that point.
Right. That's where the intraverbal comes in. This is the conversationalist.
Like the echoic, an intraverbal is evoked by a verbal SD. Someone says something to you. But critically, an intraverbal lacks point-to-point correspondence.
So the content does not match. If I ask you, what's your favorite color? And you answer blue, the words are completely different.
Right. The exam mock example is a teacher reading a book to the class. The teacher says, my button, my 3. And the student fills in the blank, shouting, groovy buttons.
Oh, nice. The teacher's verbal stimulus evoked the student's verbal response, but the words didn't mirror each other.
That lack of point-to-point correspondence is the absolute hallmark of an intraverbal. It's answering questions, filling in the blanks, associating words.
But hold on. In that example with the book, the teacher spoke out loud and the student spoke out loud. Auditory in, auditory out. Doesn't that mean they have formal similarity?
They do share formal similarity in that specific vocal conversation. But an interverbal, by definition, can lack formal similarity too.
Wait, really? How?
Well, if I ask you a question out loud and you answer by typing on your phone and showing you the screen, we have an auditory stimulus and a visual response. No formal similarity. And since the words don't match, there's no point-to-point either. The defining rule of the intraverbal is simply the lack of point-to-point correspondence.
All right, so if we've mastered those two terms, point-to-point and formal similarity, we can decode the final two operants, which are highly specific to reading and writing.
Textual behavior and transcription.
Let's look at textual behavior first.
Oh.
In plain English, textual behavior is reading written words out loud.
Yep. The discriminative stimulus, the trigger, is visual text on a page, and the response is vocal. You see the word apple written on a flashcard, and you say the word apple out loud.
Let's apply our test here. Does it have point-to-point correspondence? Yes. The written word apple matches the spoken word apple exactly. The beginning, middle, and end are identical.
Right.
But does it have formal similarity? No. The stimulus was visual text, but my response was an auditory sound. They're in entirely different sense modes.
Perfect. Now, this leads to a massive trap that the mock exams love to spring on students. The sources heavily emphasize this. Textual behavior does not imply reading comprehension.
Okay, I have a really hard time believing that. I mean, if I read the word apple on a piece of paper, my brain instantly pictures a red apple. I know what it is. You can't separate the reading from the comprehension.
You feel like you can't separate them because your brain is chaining multiple operants together instantaneously.
Ugh.
But behaviorally, they're distinct. Let me prove it to you.
Okay, prove it.
If I hand you a flashcard with a word written in phonetic Russian, a language you don't speak, you could look at the letters, sound them out, and vocalize the word perfectly.
Oh, wow. Okay, fair.
You are engaging in pure textual behavior. You vocalize the text point to point without formal similarity, but you have absolutely no idea what the word means.
Mind blown. Seriously.
Like, comprehension involves a whole separate network of other operants, like intraverbals and listener responding. Textual behavior is strictly the physical act of decoding the symbols into sound.
That makes perfect sense. It's just the decoding. So what is transcription then?
Transcription is essentially taking dictation. It's hearing a spoken word and writing it down or spelling it out. The trigger is auditory, and the response is visual or written text.
Okay, so I hear you say apple, and I use a pen to write the letters A-P-P-L-E on a piece of paper. The word's the exact same, so we have point-to-point correspondence.
Yeah.
But the stimulus was auditory, and my response was visual, so we lack formal similarity. I like to think about textual and transcription, like translating a digital file on a computer.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, if I took a text document and I run it through a program to convert it into an audio file, the data itself, the actual words, matches exactly point to point. But the format of the file, like a docs versus an MP3, is completely different. The sense mode has changed, so there's no formal similarity.
That perfectly captures how the content transfers across sense modes while maintaining its exact structure.
Awesome. So you now have the 6 major tools in your toolkit. You have MANs, tacts, echoics, intraverbals, textuals, and transcription. Now we need to look at how the BCBA exam is going to try to use these definitions against you.
Yeah, and they will try. The mock exams in our source material reveal clear patterns in how they try to trick students. When you're facing a scenario question on the exam, you need a reliable, step-by-step flowchart.
Do not just read the paragraph and guess based on how the scenario generally feels.
No, absolutely not. Rely on the mechanics.
Step 1, identify the antecedent. What happened in the environment right before the behavior occurred? Was it a motivating operation like hunger or escaping a task? Was it a nonverbal stimulus like seeing an object or smelling smoke? Or was it a verbal stimulus like someone asking a question or a written word on a page?
Exactly. And then step 2, identify the consequence. What maintained the behavior? Was it specific reinforcement where the person received the exact item or activity they communicated about? Or was it generalized conditioned reinforcement, like a high five, praise, or a token?
If you rigorously apply those 2 steps, you can eliminate the vast majority of incorrect multiple-choice answers immediately.
You really can.
But you still have to watch out for the common mistakes.
Yeah.
Mistake number 1, assuming verbal means vocal. The exam will test you on this.
Guaranteed.
A mock question will describe a client who uses sign language to ask for a toy or types on an iPad to answer a question. Do not be fooled into thinking it isn't verbal behavior just because they aren't using their vocal cords. If their behavior acts on a listener to mediate a consequence, it is verbal.
And the second major mistake is falling for multiple control traps. We touched on the impure tact earlier, but the exam questions can get very layered and complex.
Oh, yeah.
There's a specific mock exam question in our sources that perfectly illustrates how tricky this can get.
The grimace shake question.
Yes.
Let me set the scene for this one. A teenage girl holds up a purple drink and asks her mom, "Do you even know what this is?" And the mom rolls her eyes and says, "Of course it's a grimace shake."
Such a classic scenario.
Right. So the exam will ask, what operant is the mom displaying?
And students read that scenario and immediately jump to a single conclusion. One group of students will look at it and say, well, she is labeling the purple drink, labeling the environment is a tact.
Makes sense.
Right. But another group of students will look at it and say, the daughter asked a question, and the mom answered it without matching the words point to point. Answering a question is an intraverbal.
But the reality is, both groups are only half right.
Exactly. The mom's behavior is under multiple control. It is an impure tact because it's evoked by the visual sight of the purple shake, which is a nonverbal stimulus.
Right.
And simultaneously, it is an intraverbal because it's evoked by the daughter's question, which is a verbal stimulus. The exam wants to see if you can recognize that human behavior is complex and often controlled by several variables in the environment at the exact same time.
So when you're reading a scenario on the boards, don't just look for the first obvious trigger and stop reading. Scan the entire environment described in the paragraph for all the controlling variables.
It's so important. And honestly, mastering these operants isn't just an academic exercise to get a passing score.
No, it's real life.
It's the fundamental framework you will use as a clinician to analyze why a client is struggling to communicate and to know exactly which clinical levers to pull to help them build a more robust, independent life.
Let's do a quick recap of what we've unpacked today. We started by throwing out the structural definition of language and adopting Skinner's functional approach.
It's not about the nouns and verbs, it's about the listener mediating the reinforcement.
We covered MANs, which are our wants and needs, driven by motivating operations and maintained by specific reinforcement.
And tacts, which are how we label the physical environment around us, triggered by nonverbal stimuli and maintained by generalized social reinforcement.
We looked at the echoics, where the trigger and response match perfectly point to point and share formal similarity.
And we contrasted that with the conversationalists, the intraverbals, where we answer questions and fill in blanks without that point-to-point match.
And finally, we decoded textuals, reading written words out loud without necessarily comprehending them, and transcription, writing spoken words down.
You've got it all.
You now have the analytical flowchart to break down any exam scenario. Look for the antecedent, look for the consequence, and always watch out for multiple control. If you're putting in the work and doing these deep dives, you are going to absolutely crush your BCBA exam.
You really are.
We want to encourage you to continue this study series and keep mastering the material. Make sure you follow Amethyst Therapy Services for a ton of amazing resources designed specifically for this journey. You can find them on the web at www.amethysttherapyservices.com. And if you have questions or need support with your prep, email them at info@amethysttherapyservices.com.
We covered a tremendous amount of ground today, really analyzing the invisible mechanics of how humans connect with one another.
And as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over while you study your Cooper text tonight.
Think back to that very first definition of verbal behavior we explored. If all of our verbal behavior, every word we speak, every sign we make, every text we send, is entirely shaped and maintained by the listeners around us mediating our reinforcement.
Who is really steering the ship?
Exactly. In any given conversation, who is actually in control? The person speaking or the person listening?